This is one of 3 videos focusing on non-mathematical ways to improve the marks you get in your GCSE maths exam papers. I believe there's a lot of scope to boost your marks and therefore grades without even touching the maths. Obviously, working to improve your maths in addition to absorbing these methods is a very good plan too. This video talks about how to strategically approach a maths exam, and in my other 2 videos in this set I will concentrate on how to revise for maths and how to manage maths anxiety and use mental strategies in order to perform better. So let's talk about strategic ways of making sure that we get as many marks as possible in all of the maths papers. So maths might have conjured up negative feelings for you. So you might as well go the whole hog and view your maths exam as a full-on battle. In this battle you need to be watching out for clues on how to clock up wins, they being marks, and you need to be as mentally sharp as possible to do that. If you've noticed that there tends to be timing problems whenever you do a maths pass paper, either you finish too early or you have nowhere near enough time, you'll need to respond to that observation about yourself. You could try taking deep breaths, calming down and answering the questions in a very considered and mindful way if you're going very fast through a paper. And if there is still time left when you finish, then you could really make sure that you check your answers very thoroughly. And both those things stand a good chance of maximising your marks. If you're at the other end of the spectrum and there just doesn't seem to be enough time, you could maybe cut out going over things unnecessarily, and you definitely need to make sure that your mind is as sharp as possible, and that you would certainly benefit from doing lots of practice throughout the year to increase your speed. So as you know, you have 3 papers to sit for most of the exam boards. The first paper is a non-calculator paper and the other 2 are calculator papers. So the different types of paper involve different strategies. For the non-calculator paper, you'll need to bring your A game with times table recall. You need to be confident on how to add, subtract, multiply and divide large numbers, decimals, scaled up versions of times table. You need a method of calculating fractions and percentages without a calculator. So the strategy for the calculator paper is to use your calculator as much as humanly possible. You get no extra marks for doing things in your head, so you might as well save time and mental energy and avoid mistakes by using your calculator as much as possible to help you with calculations. On my YouTube channel I've got calculator playlists for tips on calculator use. It's really important to know exactly what your calculator can do for you, and it's also very important to become as one with the calculator that you plan to take into the exam with you. So please always use your own calculator when you do maths throughout the year, so it becomes as familiar to you as your phone. Right, another tip to bear in mind is the mark to minute rate. You have 1.5 hours to do each exam, which obviously is 90 minutes. There are 80 possible marks to gain on your paper, so roughly you'd expect to gain 1 mark every minute with 10 minutes to spare. This is useful to bear in mind, as when you look at a question and note how many marks you stand to gain from it, that will also tell you how many minutes you ideally should spend on the question. Some 1-mark questions you'll do extremely quickly, so you'll have time in the bank, so to speak, in order to give to other questions. In my previous video on revision, I talked about a 5-step pre-exam loop to carry out to help you get as mathematically strong as possible. This time is a very good time to practice using the mark per minute concept, and also the time experimentation, so that you can be in the best shape for the exam. So in the exam you might have to make difficult decisions, i.e. deciding to stop working on a question because you've already spent too much time on it and you're trying to avoid cutting yourself out of potentially getting fresh marks on other questions. If you are a not enough time person, this might be a decision that you have to make to move yourself through the paper. Also, the mark per minute concept might have the effect of calming you down if you're someone who finishes your exam very early. So comprehension of a question is very important. I've seen students annoyed with themselves over and over again because they know only too well that they could have bagged marks in questions that they've ended up getting wrong. And the reason that they haven't is because they have not read the question properly. It's so annoying for them. To avoid this, make a point of reading questions slowly and with an open, clear mind, making no assumptions about what the question is about, and really trying to imagine what's happening in the question. If the question is a problem-solving question that features a lot of words, then one way to really help yourself move on with this type of question is to turn what you carefully read into a visual image. This helps moving on your thinking so that you can then find out what maths to actually do. So be as creative as you want with your translation of the question, and then play around and experiment with ideas on how to solve the question. So I think students try to remember how to do longer questions so that they can then look at a question and replay that previous question in an attempt to try and help them with it. So I think questions are always different enough for you not to be able to do that. The best way to cope with longer questions, I think, is to learn facts and techniques and then think about each question afresh and apply what you know to that question. If you read a question and then become aware that you are rummaging around in your memory for how you did a similar question, then I would suggest that you stop yourself from doing this and try to open up your mind to approach that question for the unique question that it no doubt will be. Trust your common sense to carry you through the question. Think like you would in the real world when you're in a conversation with someone. You don't waste time thinking about previous conversations and what you said then to help you hold the conversation. You just take it as it comes and know that you'll bring things from your mind to keep the conversation going. It's the same approach when you do the longer questions in maths. Trust your thinking skills to move the question to the answer. Another tip from me is to look at the available marks for every question that you do. Your aim is to deliver to this very useful bit of information. If there's only 1 mark, one thing will get you that mark. Write a minimal answer. If there are 3 marks, for example, the mark scheme will detail 3 specific things that you have to do for those marks. And one of those things will be the answer. In the time leading up to your exam, you'll be looking at mark schemes and getting a good idea about how they work and what to expect from them. So by the time it comes to doing your exam, you'll be able to predict how to get those marks. One thing that's definitely true is that you can't just write down one answer, if there are 3 marks of that for that question and expect to get all 3 marks. Your written answer needs to be delivered in a way that's very clear to the marker. Neatest handwriting, obviously. Your job is to make the person who marks your exam easy. Try and fit what you need to write into the space in a line-by-line logical way, and all the time focus on what you think will gain you each individual mark, and then make extra effort to make these things very clear. As you know, questions get more difficult as you progress through the paper. You're more likely to get marks on the earlier questions, so concentration and checking needs to be at its absolute best at this point. Expect the end questions to seem like killers, but don't let them intimidate you. Don't walk away from the paper and think of how you felt doing the end questions and imagine that you've done very badly. The end questions give students who are aiming for a grade 5 a chance to get those marks. So if you're aiming for a grade 4, you'll understandably won't be able to get some of the end question marks, and that's totally normal. What you can certainly do is to have a look at the end questions and try and get as many method marks or marks as possible from these, and bear in mind the mark per minute situation and don't spend too much time trying to get into the very, very difficult questions. Your time is potentially better spent checking the easier questions. This time management is quite a complex issue. Ultimately, it's totally your choice about how you spend your time during your maths papers, which is why it's a very good idea to practice doing lots of exam papers in exam conditions before the exam so that you can experiment with how you manage your time. This, of course, is a micro example of life in general. We all have limited time and things that we want to achieve in that time so that we do as well as possible in our lives. Doing as well as possible looks very different for every individual, which is why the time management plan has to come very much from you. So we're building up quite a list of things to bear in mind during the exam. These things will become second nature with practice. Checking it is another concept that will hopefully get you more marks. In the exam, if you've completed all the questions and have time spare to check, don't ever sit there chilling out thinking, hooray, that's me finished. That end bit of time is certainly checking time. Checking works best when you don't look over what you've written, as it's highly likely you'll reinforce any mistakes that you might have made. It's best if you cover over what you've written for a question and redo the question and then compare your two answers to see if they're the same. Statistically, it's likely that you'll get the first question in the paper wrong because of nerves, so that would be a very quick, easy one to check as a start of your checking process. You'll have an instinct as to what's best to check, and maybe you'll put an asterisk by questions as you do them to give yourself a sign that you want to go back and check those. So the last point that I'm going to make about how to use strategy to maximise maths during an exam is about performance state. Athletes and footballers are given strict instructions as to what they should or shouldn't do before an event or a match. So if you're taking your maths paper seriously, which I'm sure you are, it's a period of time which you want to perform your very best to achieve a result. You should also potentially be like the sports people and guard your ability to perform with a sharp brain for this exam. Obvious wins would be making sure that you have a good night's sleep, as many nights as possible before the exam, and being well hydrated during the exam is important, but you don't want to be distracted by wanting the loo, so careful balance here. I would suggest eating a breakfast that's going to give you a slow energy release if you would usually eat breakfast, i.e. nothing sugary. You don't want a sugar crash in the middle of the exam. You could also experiment with things like light exercise before the exam to see if that helps you think better, like having a brisk walk. You could also experiment to see if you think worse and in a more of a distracted way after a stint on social media in the morning before the exam. Maybe you're distracted by not having a quick on your socials before the exam, because you might be wondering what's there for you. So experiment, see what works best for you. Maybe having a good chat to your friends will help you keep calm and therefore perform well. Maybe you need alone time before the exam. Coffee or energy drinks are another possible help to you. So do they make you feel better or worse in terms of your thinking state? So some things are obvious, like trying to get good sleep before the exam. But other things to get you in a good performance state are unique to you. As in life, get to know what works for you by experimentation and act on it. In other videos, I'll focus on how to revise for maths and also how to manage maths anxiety and use mental strategies in order to perform better. In the meantime, though, I hope these ideas and thoughts have helped you, and I wish you all the best.